Welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at how we can design a form using a table. So the table, we already looked at how we can structure our data or make our data look a bit more presentable using a table, right? And then we just looked at forms. So now we want to combine the two so that this form can look a bit more structured. All right, so let's just dive right into it. So we have our form already. We know, we looked through the different elements. We didn't go through every single input type, but based on the types that are there, I'm sure you can infer when to use which. Either way, that comes with practice and a bit of personal touch, because different people interpret forms different ways, and some people actually pride themselves on having, unique forms. So let us go into tables. So above the form, I'm going to start defining the structure for my table. All right. So to begin, I need, once again, table. Then in this situation, we're going to be using the first table that we built. So that's why I try to build or show two different types of tables. We did one with something to the left, something to the right? We also did one that looked more like a grid. That's more for information. So this would represent, one idea, whereas this would allow us to represent many ideas, so to speak, with each row being an idea, using the word idea loosely. All right. So I think that this layout would be perfect, where I'm going to say first name to the left and then the text box to the right, but then we want it kind of structured. So I have my table, and then I'm going to define my first row, and then this row is going to have two cells. One cell for the label and one cell for the input. So I'm just going to do this for as many times as I have data to be input. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. So I have 7 prompts for data on my form. So I'm going to have at least 7 rows, 1 row per prompt. All right, so I lost count just now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Simple copy and paste, right? So now I'm just going to start filling them in. So in the first cell, I'm going to have my prompt for the first name. So I'm going to copy. I'm not going to cut, because I want us to see the before and after, right? So I'm going to copy, even though the after is going to be on top of the before on the page, but that's secondary. So I'm going to copy the label, put in the first cell, all right? And then I'm going to copy the input, and I'm going to put in the second cell, all right? And then I'm just going to do that for each one. So the same thing for last name. I'm copying the last name label, and then I'm going to copy the input for last name, and I'm just spacing it out for readability. So I'm going to do that. You can pause the video and attempt it. Either way, I'm going to just finish it up right now. All right, so I finished my little transfer. I have some changes to make, of course, but I'm just going to scroll through slowly so that you can, in case you didn't finish up, you can just look at my code, and then you can go ahead and reproduce it as you may need to, right? So I'm speaking very slowly while scrolling very slowly, so that you can at least pause with each section and copy the code if necessary. But I'm going to continue now that I'm done with that slow scrolling, and I'm going to put in 2 missing things, which would be a submit button, and we can just look at the changes afterwards. So I put in as many rows as I had data prompts. I didn't put in a row to have the submit button. So I'm going to say TR and then TD. Now, I don't need 2 cells for my submit button. I really only need 1 cell for my submit button, right? So the cool thing about tables is that you can have many cells, and then you're going to have a column per cell that you have. But the thing is, I only need 1 cell for the submit button. So it's only going to give me technically 1 column for that row. All right. So tables are kind of flexible that way. Anyways, after doing this transfer, quote unquote, notice none of this is wrapped up in a form tag. So the elements are there, but they're not in a form tag. So make sure that they are in a form tag. Now, I haven't put them in a form tag. I will, but I'm just letting you know that I know they're not in a form tag. All right. So when we go back to our page, then we can see an almost instantaneous difference between the two layouts. So we see here where the the label side by side, right? And then we see here where they are side by side, but they are clearly lined up in a better way, right? So the reason there's so much space between first name and the text box would be because select reason for contact is the longest bit of text, and this entire column is stretching to accommodate it, right? But then everything else is quite fine, right? So then we have our submit button, and our submit button is really just inside of this column because we only defined one cell for this row. All right. Now, the next thing would be to make sure that it's in a form. So I'm going to make sure I take the form. So I'll just copy the form tag and put it, or you know what, let me rewrite it just to reinforce. So you can wrap the entire table inside of the form, right? So I'm opening and closing the form. And I'm only going to retype the action because I want this form to go to the action just the same. And I'm calling it post. The action is post contact.html. So I open the form, and then what I'll do, I have two options. I can cut the close form and bring it to the bottom, or I can just take the entire table. All right, so all I did was click over here and collapse it, see? So I hover over that section, collapse the table and everything in it, cut that, and just paste it inside of the form. All right, so when my form is open, my form tag now contains the table with all the relative form elements. All right, and everything now looks a bit more structured. When I go back, well, nothing would change visibly because the form tag doesn't have any visible effect, but it does affect the functionality. So when I click submit, it knows which action it is to go to, and then it says, thank you for contacting us. All right. Now let us play a bit with CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out the code that is generating the original form, and then I'm going to start applying some CSS to kind of style up how this form is being presented. So back in our code, the original form, I'm just going to collapse it, Control K and C, and oh, I have a bunch of comments in there, so it's not quite going to work. All right, let me just undo that. So you see, because I have all these comments in there, the global comment that I intended to put around it would fail because then it's opening and closing, then opening and closing, opening and closing. So that's just causing conflict. So what I'll do is just put a bunch of break tags so that it doesn't appear on screen while we're styling the original form. So let me just, yeah, so I would have to scroll all the way down and be far more deliberate to see it. So that's fine. So let us just apply some CSS and kind of beautify this layout a bit more. So in my CSS file, I'm going to define a file and I'm going to call it a class, and I'm calling it form-control. So yes, you can use dashes, right? Form-control. And then in form-control, I'm going to say that I want the width of any form control here to be 100%. All right. All right. So with that form control class defined, of course, now I need to let my form controls know that they should be applying the style defined in that class. So in my input, I'm going to have to say class equals that particular class, which is form control. So I can just write it in one, copy it, and paste it in all the others. And I'll just do that quickly. All right, input. I don't really think it applies to radio buttons like it would to the others, but that's fine. I'll just apply it nonetheless. And then if I take a quick look at what is rendered, then, well, nothing much changes because if I look at the table itself is really over to one section, right? So that is as wide as the table gets. well, here's the table, right? So the blue section represents the table. The blue section here represents the form. So the form is stretching right across, but then the table is only stretching as much as it has content, right? And then inside of that, the form control class is saying you should stretch as much as the table is. So what I can do is expand the table. Now I have two options. I can reuse the class that I already have. So I have info table where I said width is 100 and border collapse. I could reuse info table, but then I could also define my own class for form tables, right? So just to drive home the point that the class is reusable anywhere and on a case-by-case basis, I'm going to use info table inside of the table being used for this form. So class equals info table, right? And then when I do that, you're going to see now that it stretches right across the screen. So info table said, give me 100% width, center align all of the text. And so you can see all of that is happening. And then all of these were form control, which I said stretch to 100% of the width of your container, so to speak. So now that everything is 50-50, the text box is now stretching to 50% of this screen or of the table. All right. Now let's look at probably spacing out the text boxes a bit. So I'm telling you that the possibilities are endless. Everybody interprets forms differently. So I'm going to try and style my form in a way that I think is beautiful. You may have a different opinion, no problem. But as long as you have the foundation, then my job here is done. All right. So I'm going to go over to my CSS, and then I'm going to say inside of form control that I want to apply a padding. All right, so remember padding is borders versus content inside. And the thing with padding is that you can just set values. So you can define the top, then the right, then the bottom. So let me show you an example. If I say 10 pixels by 5 pixels by 10 by 5, let me just copy that and write it quickly. I can actually define the quadrant values in one line. So I can say padding and then it goes top, right, bottom, left. All right. But then if I want the top and the bottom to have 10 pixels and the right and the left to have 10 pixels, I could do it this way. Nothing is wrong. Or I could just define two. So it will automatically say, okay, this is top and bottom. This is left and right. Barring that, I can always say padding dash and whichever quadrant I specifically want to set the value for. All right. So I'm going to do the 10 and 5. I'm also going to give each form control a margin of say 8 pixels from top and bottom and 0 pixels to the left and to the right. And then I'm going to put in this other one that says box sizing, and I want it to be border box. All right. So I know these things because I've been doing this for years and I kind of have my style and know which styles I go for by default. So if you don't know these, I'm not going to tell you that you must go learn them, you must memorize them. I'm not necessarily setting out to teach them that way because case by case basis. All right. So after making these changes, I'm going to go back and look at my form and okay, so the text boxes kind of have a bit more, breadth. That's fine. And so you see that they're taking up a bit more space and they look a bit more, I would say official. If you look at the borders, you see that these lines go right across because remember these lines are going across for each cell. But then because we put submit in its one cell by itself, you're seeing that the cell stops at 50%. All right. Now I'm going to push the envelope a bit more on my form controls, and I'm going to give these controls a border. So I'm going to give them, let's say 2 pixels, thick border. It should be solid. So for the type, you have solid, you have dashed, you have dotted. I like solid. It's just keep it solid and done. And then I'm going to borrow the shade of azure. Do I want azure? No, that's not the shade I want. I want the shade of blue that I use in my nav. So I'm going to borrow this RGB, right? and then I'm going to use that as the color for the border. So when I go back to the page, now you see that they're kind of highlighted in that blue that matches the nav, right? So I think that's looking pretty cool. Now let's pay some attention to our submit button, because everybody is, getting a nice style, and he's just still as regular as he looked before. So what I'm going to do is go back to my CSS, and I don't believe that we applied form control to the button. Did we give it the class? No, we did not. So I'm going to tell it that it is also a form control, or better yet, I can create a specific style for this button. So if I give it form control, then it's going to inherit things that I probably don't want it to have, right? So instead of giving it form control, I'm going to define a class, and I'm going to say .btn-submit. All right. So you realize that I'm using a lot of classes now, because outside of the global styling, you can use the ID, but then ID is so restrictive because ID can only be used on one element at a time on the page. So when you have a class, it gives you far more flexibility, because you either reference the class or you don't, right? If you need it here, you reference it. If you need it there, you reference it, or you don't, right? So BTN submit, what I want as a background color is the same RGB as the nav. So I'm going to say background dash color of BTN submit should be that RGB combination. I don't want it to have any border, so I'm going to say border none. So what happens is that even if you change the background color, you're still going to see that big black outline around the edges. If you just look at the button, you see that it has that black outline. So when I say border none, that black outline that comes by default goes away, right? So I'm saying border should be none. I want the text color. So just by saying color, I'm saying the text, and I'm going to make it look just like the navbar anchor tag. So I'm going to set it to Azure. I want it to have a padding, and for the padding, I'm going to say that it should have maybe 16 or 15 pixels top and bottom, and I want it to have 25 pixels. Oh, my bad. 15 pixels top and bottom, and 25 pixels left and right. Text decoration. So if there's any text decoration, I don't want to have any. So I'm going to specify that it should be none. I'm going to give it a margin. So this is just me making up things based on how I build forms, right? So, but then, we've been through most of these things, background color, border color, padding, text decoration, and margin. You know what those selectors are. I'm just combining them in one class, so that when I apply this class, all of these things come together and give me a possibly desirable result. If I don't get it right, I just come and tweak until I like what I see, right? So I'm giving it a margin 4 or 5 pixels top and bottom, and 3 pixels left and right. And if you want your mouse cursor to change, so you don't want it to just always look like a mouse, so when you say cursor, you can select from this extensive list of options to say when it hovers on it, what do you want it to look like, right? So I'm going to say pointer. All right. On top of all that, I want the button to stretch right across the width of the table. So I'm going to say width is equal to 100%. All right. So after doing all of that in the CSS, I'm just going to take the class name btn-submit, go over to my button and say that your class reference is btn-submit. Now let's see what that looks like. All right. It's not too bad. But then notice that it's kind of stuck to the side. So the reason I said I wanted it to stretch right across would be that, you fill out this form, it's easier to see the submit button that's going from left to right of the form than just on the left or half of the page to the left. But then the problem is that it's only in one cell, and that one cell is restricted to 50% of the page. So with tables, we have an attribute called call span that we can put inside of a cell. So once again, notice for every other row, we have two cells. We have two TD tags. For the submit row, we only have one TD tag, aka one cell. All right. So I can tell this one cell that I want it to have a call span, which is short for column span of 2. So by default, a cell is a cell. It's only going to take up space inside of one column because that's what it's for. But then if I have 4, 3, 5 columns and I want one cell to stretch its content across all of these columns, then I can say call span is equal to the number of columns I want you to stretch your content across. And so when I do that, and then I look back at my form, I see my submit button stretching right across. Okay, so when I fill out this form, enter first name, last name, email address, select the gender, and I mean, this is just my impression of the form. You can always style it because you probably don't want, male and female or this radio button combination to be listed like this. You probably just want them side by side, and that's fine, right? So it's up to you. And I believe that that is relatively easy to do because I put in the break tags for, okay, well, I see here form control radio button. There's no break tag between it and the label. All right, so I believe that's why. So maybe form control has something, width being 100%. So you want to be careful there, right? So because I'm saying width is 100%, when the radio button, let me go back to my radio button. When the radio button gets the class form control, it is trying to stretch. And of course, the radio button itself can't stretch, but it is taking up 100% of the width of whatever. So then I can probably tweak this a little, remove class form control from the radio buttons. All right, so that they don't try to stretch to 100%. And when I go back, you see now it's no longer stretching 100%. And then I can take out the break tags so that they both appear in one line. So, I mean, sometimes there's some simple things that cause your design to not look exactly the way you want it to. And then regardless of all the modifications that we've made, if we click submit, we go to the next page and they say, thank you for contacting us. So that is how you can go about, beautifying your forms, providing a better structure and layout for your forms, using tables, using CSS, and just experimenting. So like I said, people take form creation as an art, right? And different people have different interpretations of how to represent the data collection elements. So you be you practice, and of course, let me know if you run into any difficulty and need any help. I'll be happy to reach out to you.